the kingdom era and the book of 1 Samuel. So right before we get into 1 Samuel, we'll go back and take a look at the end of Judges. But for tonight, we're going to be in Ruth. We're going to be in Ruth. The very last verse of Judges is the same that we've seen throughout the book. It's a restating of the fact, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. And that's going to play into the situation with Ruth and with Naomi, because they didn't have an infrastructure that could really help you in times of difficulty. And there's great famine that comes in the area around Judah. And because of that, things unfold in the lives of Elimelech and his family. I had come very close to just skipping Ruth altogether, and my wife did not think that was a good idea. So I took another look at it. I did some reading on Ruth and came up with some things that I found a little bit more interesting than what I had before. We're going from a Rambo marathon in the book of Judges to a Hallmark movie in Ruth. All right, we're going from violence and mayhem to a romance. But the romance has a lot to say about future things that happen in Israel, and even all the way down to our Messiah. So it's a book worth taking a look at, and we're going to spend a couple of 3, maybe 4 weeks looking at this particular book. Israel has probably a stronger sense of nationalism than it did before, but it's still not a kingdom. It's still not well governed. They're still not ready to act and react as a whole group. This is still during the time of the judges. We don't get a specific date. We don't know exactly when this happened or who the judge might have been at the time. But we do know that there were some problems going on financially and agriculturally in particular that set these things in motion. So I want us to start reading and just read down through chapter 1 and then go back and take a look at some of the things that happened. Before we do, one other comment. There are 3 different kinds of people. Those that see the glass half full, we call them optimists. Those that see the glass half empty, we call them pessimists. What do we call the ones who just go over and drink the water? Thirsty. Opportunists. There's water, I'm thirsty, I'm drinking it. So they don't give as much time. Ruth is about opportunities. The whole book is full of things happening and people taking advantage of the way things unfold. Sometimes we get the impression that it's people just being people. Sometimes we get the impression that it's God being God. Right? The fact that one of the characters in Ruth ends up being the great-grandmother of King David and in the lineage of Messiah leads you to believe that maybe God's hand was more in this than just happenstance. But notice how the characters in this story take advantage of opportunities to take care of their families and to take care of each other. All right. In the days when the judges were ruling, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. The NIV starts with a K. I think in the King James it's spelled Chilion. They were Ephraimites from Bethlehem, Judah. They went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. She was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah, the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." She kissed them goodbye. They wept aloud and said to her, "No, we will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than it is for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem just as the barley harvest was beginning. And I really don't think that Hallmark could set it up any better. I mean, this is a story waiting to be told. Things have gone really badly, and now she's going to be in a position where things are going to get better and better for Ruth and subsequently for Naomi. Let's talk about some of the things that are opportunistic in this. When the famine comes, Elimelech decides not to stay in his hometown, with his home clan. He takes his wife and his two sons and leaves because he sees an opportunity to do better in Moab. Now, he probably didn't own land in Moab. He's there for about 10 years, but he finds work, he finds a way to make a living, and he's able to take care of his wife and his two sons while they are there. Unfortunately for Elimelech, he passes away too soon to kind of fulfill his destiny in Moab, and he leaves behind his wife and two sons. It's a choice. Do I stay with the people of God? Do I stay in a situation that's difficult, or do I leave that behind and go and live in Moab where I think things will be better for me? There's a couple of things to consider. Even if things are better in Moab, Moab is not supposed to exist anymore. They were supposed to wipe Moab out. They've had battles with Moab, and they've won those battles, and they've won those battles decisively, and yet Moab is still there. It's still a place. It still has its own name, its own people, and they actually go and live among the Moabite people. You might remember that Moab is named for the child that was born to Lot's oldest daughter. When his two daughters had him in the cave and got him drunk and had children by their father, Moab is the oldest of those children, and so these are his offspring. So this is not an Israelite thing. It's not an Israelite group that he moves in with, and he subjects his family to a foreign setting, to a foreign culture, and we find out a little bit later, Naomi tells Ruth, "Why don't you go back like Orpah did to your own hometown and your own gods?" And so there's a sense in which there's a separation between Elimelech and his family and the people that they're living with. We don't know if Elimelech and his family were faithful the whole time or whether they had problems interacting with the people. one of the things that God had told the Israelites not to do is intermarry with them. So now we have his two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, intermarrying with the Moabite women. So his sons make choices as well. They have an opportunity to go back to Israel to find wives if they want to. You remember Abraham saying, Isaac's not going to have a wife from around here. He's not going to marry a Canaanite. He sent his slave all the way to Laban's house. Where did he live? Padan Aram. All the way to Padan Aram to get a wife for his son because he didn't want his son marrying the Canaanite women. Well, Elimelech takes his sons into Moab, and his sons decide that it's easier, more profitable, whatever it is, that they marry locally, and so they marry Moabite women. Both of these women seem to have been good choices. I mean, for everything we know, neither one of these women was a bad idea. And one in particular, goes down in history. And that little section, whither thou goest, I will go. Whither thou lodgest, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Has anybody ever heard that before? Have you been to any weddings? In the 70s and 80s, if you went to a wedding and they didn't say that, they were leaving something out. I mean, that just you had the standard vows, and then you had to have that involved in there. So one of them, even though she is a Moabite, ends up being part of even our culture, part of our wedding traditions later on. They stayed there 10 years. We don't know whether Israel got any better during those 10 years or whether it was bad for the whole 10 years and then suddenly it gets better and she hears about it. But she's kind of reached rock bottom and she has another opportunity. So she decides to take that opportunity to move back to live among her own people because things are getting better financially and agriculturally back in Bethlehem. So Elimelech takes his family because the opportunity is better in Moab. Naomi decides to bring them back to Bethlehem because the opportunities are better in her old hometown. But she doesn't see herself as having much choice anymore, and her reason is that God doesn't like her. Have you ever felt that way? I mean, was there ever a time in your life that you felt like God had just turned his back on you? I've met a few people that have felt that way. You have to get pretty low for a long time. And evidently she had had so many things happen negatively in her life in those 10 years. She lost her husband, she lost both of her sons, and now she is kind of the head of the house and has two daughters-in-law that are depending on her, and she can't provide for them either. So she's stuck. So in two different places in chapter 1, she says the reason that all of this is happening is God doesn't like me. She tells her daughters-in-law, you might as well stay here. This isn't your problem. God doesn't like me. His hand has turned against me. She gets back to her hometown and she says, don't call me Naomi anymore because Naomi means pleasant. So my life is anything but. Call me Mara. You can go back to where God made them drink the bitter water after they sinned against him with the golden calf, and they named that place Mara and Meribah, the place of the bitterness. Right? So she said, my life is just horrible. My life has turned out terribly because God is somehow angry with me. Now, how would she figure that out? Why would she think that that was true? Maybe she thinks that God is angry at her for moving to Moab in the first place. Maybe she thinks that she and Elimelech should have just stayed in Bethlehem the whole time, and their sons should have married people in Bethlehem. They should never have been in Moab. We don't know, other than things have happened badly for Naomi for the last several years, and she feels the weight of God's judgment, even though it may not have been there in reality. Now, Orpah is released from any obligation to the extended family and eventually goes home. I think it's neat, though, that the first time Naomi says go home, she doesn't. Right? Both girls feel that connectedness to their mother-in-law, and they want to stay with her. They're a unit. They've been through a lot of things together. All three of them had attended those funerals together, and they're a unit. And so as far as Orpah is concerned, she ought to stay in the unit. But she's also given an opportunity, and she's a bit of an opportunist. You can stay here, and you can get remarried and live among your people, and you don't have to change your culture, and you don't have to change your life. You can just be who you've always been. Just go find another husband. I'm not going to have any way of providing one for you. So Orpah decides to go and take that advice finally, and she's released from all kinds of obligation at that point. Hopefully she found a nice Moabite man and lived out her years having Moabite babies, and life was good. We don't know. Do you recognize the name? The name is a very famous name in America. Oprah is actually Orpah. Her name is not Oprah. It is Orpah. Her name is Orpah. What's her middle name? Orpah Gale Winfrey is her real name. Nobody pronounced it correctly. They all called her Oprah all of her life. And so now, the big O, Oprah, is actually an assumed name. She was Orpah at birth. Her mom named her after this woman. So Orpah, Oprah, as we know her, we've still got this name in our vernacular 3,000 years plus later after the time. But Ruth refuses. She's not going home. She is so connected to her mother-in-law. She feels that her greatest opportunity is to stay with Ruth. If I stay with Ruth, or is to stay with Naomi. If I stay with Naomi, I have a chance. If I stay with my mother-in-law, I think good things will happen to me. So Naomi's opinion of Naomi and Ruth's opinion of Naomi are two different things. She sees her as a great role model, as somebody that she wants to imitate, as someone that she wants to stay with, learn from, continue on in life. We use that, whither thou goest, I will go, as a husband and wife, but its origin was a daughter-in-law and her mother-in-law. There's an important lesson here, I think. It's okay to have someone place their allegiance in you as long as you don't lead them in the wrong direction. I think most of us are somewhat hesitant to let people put too much trust in us or too much emphasis on us. We try to deflect, which is probably a good thing. Don't follow me, follow God, right? That's the right thing to do. But Paul will even say, be imitators of me as I am an imitator of Christ. So it's legitimate as long as you're leading in the right direction. And since Naomi was leading in the right direction, it's not a bad thing that Ruth wanted to follow her. And as time goes on, Naomi is such a good mother-in-law that she sees more opportunities and plugs Ruth into them. And things work out really well for Ruth because of her allegiance to Naomi. Now, Ruth's allegiance was not with the land of Canaan. She wasn't going to Bethlehem because she wanted to be a Jew. Her allegiance was not with the people of Israel. She was a Moabite. The Israelites had been their enemies through the years, so she wasn't suddenly just in love with being with Israel. She wasn't dedicated to the law of Moses, and she wasn't in allegiance to or in love with the idea of becoming a follower of Yahweh God. She was following Naomi, and Naomi was in love with the land of Canaan and with the people of Israel and with the law of Moses and with God. So she is in a position that her opportunity will lead to more opportunities for Ruth. All those things belong to Naomi. She was dedicated to all of those things. And Naomi has connections, and God has a plan. And so we'll leave that chapter right there and Lord willing, come back and talk a little bit more about how God unfolds some really neat opportunities, how Naomi recognizes those opportunities, how the culture of Israel plays into those opportunities, so that Ruth ends up being the heroine of the story that she eventually becomes. But tonight, if we can help you by way of a public response, we'd love to do that as we stand and sing.